What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting, and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Today, we're going to talk about the Great Divide. The Great Tactical Divide. That's what we're going to talk about today. Between the guys with the plate carriers and the AR-15s and Glock 19s and 5.11 stuff, and the people that are into hunting and fishing and foraging and the new buzzword bushcraft. I'm not putting either one of those down. I love both of those things. If you've listened to the bio, then you'll know that I've been a professional gunfighter for most of my adult life, by God's grace. He's got me through a lot of that. Military, law enforcement, private contractor. I've also been a hunter from a very early age. I've been blessed to hunt everything from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer and elk and wolf and bear and all manner of beast. And done a lot of fishing. In fact, right now as you're listening to this, I stopped for lunch. I am on a kind of mountaineering ruck march adventure in the Bitterroots. The Bitterroot Range right on the Idaho-Montana border, very much in the middle of nowhere. And it is beautiful. My rough plan was to ruck up these mountains until noon and then sit down, read some Bible, eat some chow, rest a little bit, record this podcast. That's what I'm doing now. Still have the love for the outdoors and those kind of things. I'll be honest, it was shortly after my time as a combat veteran in the Marine Corps and in the infantry, kind of lost my love for that kind of stuff for a little bit because, I just had enough of it. But thankfully, it didn't last very long, that stage, and I got back into it. And I love the outdoors. I love hunting and fishing and foraging. In fact, I just picked some stuff to forage when I sat down for lunch. But I also still have an M17 on my hip because people do bad things in the wilderness too, even though I couldn't even reckon the last time somebody was in the spot that I am in. I have not seen a human footprint or any sign other than an old beer can back on the trail, but I spent most of my day off a trail. But people behave badly out in the wilderness too. Not to mention wolf and both kinds of bear and mountain lion. So what I'm driving at here is there is this kind of divide in the tactical community. Some on one side may see the other people as FUDs. It's a common, derogatory term thrown around. The other ones may see the tactical guys as mall ninjas. I don't think there needs to be this animosity or this divide. And I think it's very much a modern thing in this modern gun culture 2.0. But not historically. If you look back historically, both individuals and as cultures, great warriors were also great hunters. They loved to hunt. If you look at, the Mongols, if you look at the Romans, the Greeks, the Japanese, some of the greatest warrior cultures of all time were also very much into hunting. So why the divide? Also, if you look at great individuals, Carlos Hathcock, Marine sniper. You look at Teddy Roosevelt, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. Those men just didn't use their gun, their gun of choice, right? They didn't just use it for tactical stuff, right? They didn't just use it at the Alamo. They hunted. Teddy Roosevelt didn't just lead the Rough Riders in charges, which he did, but he also hunted. He was an avid hunter. So why the animosity? Why the divide? If you have that partition up, I'd like to try and break that down today and hopefully make the gun community, gun culture 2.0 better as a whole. I'm going to talk about some skills that very much have crossover, that very much are applicable for whatever side of the fence you're on. Hopefully by listening to this today, you might want to bridge that gap and get in more of both worlds instead of just being on one side. And I know not everybody will. Some people just want to sit in a deer stand, which is not a kind of hunting that I like to do. I grew up doing it. It's not my favorite, but some people just want to do that as a way to get some peace and quiet and put meat on the table, and they have no desire to, let's say, own a handgun or anything like that. There are those people. But I think if you listen today, hopefully many people will see the other side of the coin and see the value in it. This is a big one. Firepower versus mobility. Firepower versus mobility. Now, I mentioned I just got done with a lengthy section of rucking out in the wilderness. That is my go-to bug out bag. You might call that tactical, right? It's also my go-to hunting bag. I have a bag for now. It's an Eberly stock gun runner. It's my second Eberly stock, if you are curious. Did a whole video on it. I normally just do podcasts. Every once in a while, when video I think helps, I do a video. There's a video on YouTube called The Mobob, the mother of all bug out bags. Anyway, the Eberly stock gun runner. It's a fantastic pack. It's a good balance of firepower versus mobility. Could I have a bigger pack? Could I carry a bigger pack? Yeah, but I'd cover less ground. And especially when I'm stalking and still hunting, which I really like to do. That's how I prefer to hunt, big game, elk and deer and bear. I like to spot and stalk hunt. And I could carry a bigger pack. But then I go down on my mobility. And not just how much ground I could cover per hour. Not just my miles per hour, but my alertness. Right? If the pack is so big and so uncomfortable, which is one of the reasons I think in the Marine Corps I just couldn't stand rucking, because those packs were crazy heavy. But if you get a pack, if you get that good balance where you're carrying enough gear, but you're not miserable and you're alert and you're looking around, you're reading tracks, you're seeing sign, you're listening instead of just trudging with your head down. That firepower versus mobility, that's helpful on both ends. When you're looking at plate carriers and you think, oh, this is level 4, this is way, way better than, the level 3 stuff. Until you actually wear it for 12 hours. I was the commander of a tactical team. If you listen to that part of the bio, I was in charge of the policies and procedures in the gear. Now, if guys wanted heavier plates, I would let them carry heavier plates, but we would generally do level 3 because firepower versus mobility. Yeah, might somebody take on the tactical team with, green tip or something like that, they might. But our guys a lot of times wore those for 12 hours at a time on their feet, unless they were on a break or something. They were on their feet 12 hours with that armor day after day, year after year. That firepower versus mobility, it might look good on paper, like, oh yeah, this body armor is better. It better is subjective in that, because you're giving up mobility. That firepower versus mobility equation works for both, right? It works whether you're hunting in the wilderness of, the Bitterroot Range where I am right now, beautiful country, or whether you're carrying a plate carrier and an AR-15. And you think, oh, always more ammo is better, more ammo is better. Until you try and climb a, 6-foot chain link fence chasing after somebody in a foot pursuit, and you realize, maybe I got too much stuff. Or likewise, you're carrying a pack and trying to scale up, slippery, wet, mossy terrain, and you realize, maybe my pack's a little bit too heavy. My firepower versus mobility has gone the wrong side of that equation. Here's another big thing that can benefit both. Exposure to the target. Exposure to the target. I'll start this time with the tactical side. If you do any kind of force-on-force training, you do any kind of thing where you have simunition rounds coming back at you, hitting you, doing that kind of stuff, you quickly learn the value of cover. Let alone, if you're a combat veteran, then you know that firsthand. But a lot of people aren't going to be combat veterans. But probably the closest thing you can get to realizing that with some level of pain that's not permanent is force-on-force training. When you do that force-on-force training, if you're in the tactical, uber tactical community, right, you do the force-on-force training, that's fantastic. Then you probably realize that the exposure to the target, how important it is to give as little exposure to the target as possible. That also benefits you if you're hunting, right? Especially if you're spot and stalk and still hunting. How can I maneuver and keep this terrain feature between me and that elk as long as possible so that I can get within stalking distance, I can get within 200 yards of that elk because I can read the terrain and I know how to minimize my exposure to the target. Or the reverse, right? If you know how to stalk on an elk, or even better, a pronghorn out in the southwest where there's even less cover, if you can do that, you're probably pretty good at using cover. Not exactly the same way, but you understand the principle in a way that you wouldn't if you weren't exposed to that. That's a benefit that crosses over. Exposure time to the target. Closing distance while maintaining cover or concealment. That is a big benefit for both. Also mentioned rucking, as I am in a break from this ruck that I'm doing today. And yes, I was a Marine. I know Marines call it humping, but for obvious reasons, I generally don't refer to it that way on the podcast because some people might just hear it and think I'm talking about something else. So, rucking is one of those things that benefits both. You want to be in shape for if you get in a gunfight, if the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan and you have to bug out. Well, hunting elk on the sides of mountains out west, or if you're bringing it into the more what people will call the bushcrafty backpacking world, if you hike the Appalachian Trail, then you're going to be a lot better at doing that. By God's grace, He's blessed me with a lot of health and strength, and I try and use the talents that God's given me. God gives us talents to use them. If you look at the parable of the talents, the one who uses his talents and multiplies them gets more. The one who doesn't use the talents he's been given, they get taken away. Use the talents you're given. I'm blessed to be able to work out and exercise and maintain a high level of fitness. But rucking is something different, right? Just because you're a good runner doesn't mean you're good at carrying a pack. Doesn't mean you're good at crossing all kinds of crazy terrain. Rucking is one of those things that benefits both. Now, again, if you're hunting the same 40 acres, back east, that may not apply, but most Western hunting, you're carrying a pack, and you're probably carrying it pretty long distances. Or if you want to go back east and, hike on trails, the more the bushcrafty camping kind of thing. So if you do have to bug out, then, it's not the first time you've put that pack on and done more than walk around your living room. Likewise, if you're big into elk hunting out west, you being into the tactical stuff and doing, ruck marches, even going to the treadmill if you live in a city or a suburb, instead of just waiting till elk season and throwing on a pack. If you want to, when I was stuck in Florida this past winter visiting my wife's family, I would take my pack and I would go to the treadmill at a gym because the population density in Central Florida was crazy high. But you get the idea. It benefits both, right? And likewise, if you're into the backpacking, camping, Appalachian Trail kind of crowd, the trail mix kind of crowd, I guess I would call it, the tactical stuff can really benefit you because bad things happen in national parks and forests, right? Bad things happen. There are predators, and I don't just mean bears. I mean human predators that take advantage of that no cell service, no witnesses kind of environment. Look at how many people go missing in national parks. Now, some of that is just random, natural disaster type stuff. But a lot of that, there's a lot of murders. There's a lot of crime afoot in national parks. So if you're into the backpacking, granola eating, and I'm not putting that down, probably pretty advantageous to know how to run a handgun. Go take a tactical handgun course. It's one thing to have a handgun. It's another to know how to use it. It's another to know how to access it quickly and get rounds on target quickly, right? If you are into the backpacking or long distance biking or through trail hiking, Arizona Trail, whatever trail it is, I would say Pacific Crest, but you're probably not going to be able to carry a handgun there. But if you're into that, going to an IDPA match or even going to a backup gun match or a steel challenge and being able to get consecutive hits or getting quick hits on target, accessing that firearm, being competent with it, knowing how to clear a malfunction, all those things, right? They can benefit you too. So you don't end up on a statistic of somebody that went missing in a national park, national forest. So if you have no desire to, have a plate carrier and run around with an AR-15, you still might want to understand the tactical aspects of handgun shooting for that reason alone. Here's another big one. Patience. If you're a hunter, even a spot and stalk and still hunter, right? Like I don't like sitting in a stand all day, but I like spot and stalk and still hunting. Any kind of hunting is going to require patience. It's going to require patience. I don't care if you're standing in a stream spearing fish. Whatever kind of hunter you are, you're probably familiar with patience. Probably familiar with the thing that you are after not behaving the way that you want it to. There's a difference in that you can glean if you're in the tactical realm and you've only ever shot at paper targets that are just always there, always exposed. You don't have to wait, right? Even if you're only into the tactical stuff and you never want to shoot a deer for putting meat on the table. Finding some kind of hunting or fishing that you can do to teach you patience. Maybe that you got a buddy that has a farm and you want to go eradicate some woodchucks because they're tearing up his land, or you're out west and you get a damage stamp to go take care of some land that a rancher has a problem with just massive amounts of prairie dogs, right? Getting some kind of hunting on your belt to teach you patience, to teach you that, real targets don't want to cooperate with you, right? They're not going to stand there like a B-27 target with their hands at their side. Also, and I probably learned this early on, so I kind of forgot it, but when I got my wife into hunting, I was blessed. I was a professional guide, and I got to take her on a guided sheep hunt for her first big game hunt. She had been on some small game, and took her on a sheep hunt. And one of the things she struggled with, we had to wait a while and get back on the sheep and do stuff like this because she was waiting for the animal to just stop. Because most of her shooting, she had a firearm before she met me. She was into handgun shooting, and she would go to the range, at an indoor range, and shoot a set target that was just there. And if that's all you've ever done, she didn't realize, and this is not against her, she just hadn't been exposed to it, that that animal wasn't just going to stop and wait for her to shoot it, right? You have to pick your moments. You have to be patient, and you have to know when to shoot, because you don't get all day. If you have a designated target and it exposes itself to you quick enough for you to get the shot off, you had better get the shot off, because you may not get a second chance. And that, a real target, whether it's a human trying to kill you or an animal you're trying to turn into meat on the table, doesn't want to cooperate, right? It's not giving you the optimal conditions, probably. So learning how to shoot in conditions that aren't optimal on targets that don't cooperate, that's a big, big crossover. And I think hunting is probably the best way to keep your skill sharp at that, unless you're actively in combat all the time, right? My combat tours, have been over a long time, and I've been a professional gunfighter, private contractor, and things like that. But shy of that, to keep your skills sharp and to understand those kind of things, hunting is a big thing. Again, many of the great warriors throughout history were also hunters, right? They play on each other. They benefit each other. Here's another one. Stalking and tracking. You primarily think of this as a hunting thing, stalking and tracking. I was just following some tracks before I started recording this. I love going out and tracking, especially since it rained recently here. I can really see what's new and fresh. But I understand tracking. And you might think that has no applicability in the tactical world. Well, if you have listened to some versions of the bio where I get more in depth into it, I had some more specialized assignments in law enforcement. One of those was fugitive recovery, right? Tracking down fugitives and bringing them to justice. Tracking. There's a lot of crossover there. If I understand deer behavior, if I understand they usually bed in this kind of area and they have to go here for water, and this is what they're probably eating this time of year, and I can figure out a pattern in my head and I can establish a good ambush point. Like if I say I'm going to stalk up this drainage, and I know that at this time of day they're probably going to be on this side of the mountain, and at this time of day they're probably going to be on that side of the mountain. And this is probably where they're getting water, because I see that there's a pretty legit trail that leads down here where they get water. I put all that together and I establish a good place to stalk. Put the stalk on a good ambush point, maybe a choke point in the trees, a funnel, whatever you want to call it. And I do that to become a successful hunter of, let's say, elk for this scenario. If I'm hunting fugitives, right, I can establish similar kind of thought process. Who is that person's known associates? What vehicles are registered in their name, their family's name, and their known associates' name? So I'm looking for those vehicles. The last 4 times they were arrested, what was it for? Where were they at? And I look and I see pretty much he's usually in this 4-block radius. But he has an aunt that lives over here. So if things get hot and he knows the cops are after him, where's he most likely to go? I do the same thing, right? I set up an ambush point. I use cover and concealment. If I'm doing a stakeout, I set up an ambush point, right? The same principles apply. I remember one time we had a suspect when I was on the tactical team, and the team that I had, I don't think anybody there had any hunting experience. It was very much, I hired, because I did a lot of the hiring, I hired a lot of veterans and tried to get combat veterans and things like that, which were great, but not a lot of hunting experience there. And I would encourage them to go out and hunt. But this one time, we had a suspect in a parking garage, and nobody could find him. Like, we're talking a bunch of other people were on scene. I show up on scene later, and I tracked the guy down, tracked where he went. You know why? Because tracking. It's not my first rodeo. And that one was fairly easy because there was a legit blood trail. The person we were looking for was injured. They had been injured, and I'm not going to get too deep into that, but they were injured and they were bleeding. And it was pretty easy for me to follow that blood trail. And that wasn't like gushing. Probably anybody could do that. But there was a drop here, a drop there. And you look at the terrain, which at this point was a parking garage, very different from the, Bitterroot Mountains that I'm in right now. But it's still an environment. If you were wounded, where would you go? How would you maneuver through this? You probably wouldn't walk through the center of the thing if you were bleeding and you were trying to hide that, you'd probably walk behind cars, and you'd probably cross over here to get to the exit, right? So it's not just applicable tracking and stalking. It's not just applicable to deer or elk or wolf or whatever you're hunting, right? It's applicable in the tactical world as well. Here is another one, terminal ballistics. Terminal ballistics, an understanding of that. It's one thing to see somebody on YouTube shoot a block of gel. It's another thing to actually get out and put animals in the dirt and recover them and eat them and see what bullets do and see how bullets behave. Right? That's something you can learn from hunting. With targets that have muscle and bone and lung and heart and things like that, and understanding how bullets actually perform. If you want to get really deep into it, I love handgun hunting. I've been blessed to take many a big game animal with a handgun. And I primarily do it, I think I've always done it, with one of my carry guns. Right? 9, 40, 45, 38 special. And a big part of that is I want to be proficient with the gun that I carry. And two, I want to see how those bullets perform, right? Where it's legal, where it's ethical, and you have the skills to do it. That's very much a challenge thing. If you're literally counting on it for food, then it's a hard thing to do. But if you're going out for sport, let's say you've already gotten your couple of deer that you're going to get that year for food, and the next one you're saving for your big buck or whatever, and you want the challenge, you take that, let's say, carry handgun and challenge yourself to get a deer with it. And then if you do that a couple of times, you can have a fair degree of confidence in how those bullets perform. Now, a deer is not a human. Anatomy is a little bit different, but it'll teach you a lot about, one, the importance of shot placement and how bullets actually perform. Also, the appreciation of like a difference between a rifle and a handgun. How much better and easier it is to put meat on the table, how much more effective a rifle is or a shotgun than a handgun. It'll show you that in a real world way that you probably won't forget, like somebody lecturing you in a class or a podcast. Get out there and do it. Again, there's a big difference between shooting paper, and I love shooting paper. If you listen to you know that I'm big into competition shooting. I love competition shooting. And there's benefits you can get by shooting competition, that you can translate definitely into the hunting world. And there is things you can get from the hunting world as far as shooting living, breathing targets that you won't get from competition. So, I guess to be real, I know that there always will be some sort of divide. There will be the guy that only wants to hunt deer and never wants to own a handgun or any kind of tactical gun. And there will be the guy that only wants the plate carrier and the AR-15 and the Glock. And that's it. And he has no interest in hunting at all. But let me pose this hypothetical situation. If you think that the world can radically change, and if you've lived through the past several years, you probably know that it can. What if it radically changes for the worse? What if there is some kind of disaster, and I'm not going to get all doomsday prepper, I'm preparing for an EMP or whatever it is, right? But let's say there's some kind of disaster that befalls civilizations all the time, right? The civilizations we talked about. Feudal Japan, Rome, Greece, right? Those civilizations collapse. Civilizations collapse. That's what they do. If there's a major event, a collapse, and it's so bad that a large chunk of the population is no longer alive, a significant portion, whatever that is, 50%, 90%, do you think you're better off in that scenario having just tactical skills or just hunting skills or both? Right? In that kind of scenario, if prepping is not just a way to spend money on Amazon to have cool tactical kit and post stuff on Instagram, or something to make you feel good, some endorphin rush by putting it in your shopping cart and having a cool survival knife. If it's actually to help you survive, don't you honestly think that it would be really advantageous to know how to do both? To know how to do the tactical stuff and to know how to put meat on the table. Don't you think those are both really important skills? Because I don't know the future. We don't know the future. If you want to be the best and give yourself the greatest chance, shouldn't you embrace both? Shouldn't you be acquainted with both? And the time to do that is now, pre-collapse, right? The time to get out there and learn how to run a fighting handgun is now in a USPSA or IDPA competition or a formal training class. The time to learn how to put meat on the table is now, right? When you're not going out trying to put meat on the table when you haven't eaten for 3 days and slept, and then you're trying to figure out how to locate an animal, right? The time to do it is now, before something really bad happens, so that you're proficient. In some major disaster, that's not the time to develop the skills, right? That's the time to have the skills and use the skills that you have. So, again, I know in reality there still probably will be some divide, but I'd like to see less of a Grand Canyon and less of a tactical guys calling hunters FUDs and people that only want to hunt, thinking that the tactical guys are mall ninjas or whatever. I'd like to see more of a crossover. And you may gravitate towards one side or the other, but I think it's good and healthy to be familiar with both. You could be the best hunter in the world, and if you get, robbed at a 7-Eleven late at night and they decide they don't want any witnesses, all those hunting skills really aren't that going to help you that much. Likewise, if you're the most tactical guy and you are USPSA Grand Master, that's not going to help you very much if you're starving to death and you have no idea how to hunt. So I submit they're both important. They're both different, but they both benefit each other in many ways, and they're both important. So I would encourage you, if heretofore you have looked down on one versus the other, and you can like one over the other, but I encourage you to see the value in both and lessen that tactical divide. Tactical tip for some will be very rudimentary. You may already know this, you may be familiar with this, but not everybody does, right? When my wife was getting into backpacking, she kind of thought the opposite, so I guess it's not intuitive. But if you're packing a pack, whether it's for tactical reasons or hunting reasons, in general, you put the light stuff at the bottom, and you try and get the heavier stuff close to your body and kind of towards the center of your back. Just a real rudimentary rule on packing a pack. Now, there are some exceptions, right? If there's something you need right away or may need right away, like a tourniquet, you probably want to put that on top, even though it doesn't weigh very much. But in generalities, when you're packing your pack, keep that thought process in mind. Weight is not the only part of that equation. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. It is God who makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He sets me on high places. He teaches my hands to make war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.